Okay. So welcome. This is the Antelope Valley Soaring cross-country Porch Chats, the weekly Zoom meeting that we're having for the Southern California soaring region and reaching a little bit beyond that these days. So tonight we are very, very pleased and excited to have two new speakers. And the first is Scott Wiley, who is an Antelope Valley soaring pilot for many, many years and has soared throughout the world. And then he'll introduce and hand it over to Jim Payne, who is the chief pilot for the Perlan Project, which I think everybody on this Zoom meeting knows Jim Payne's amazing feats of soaring up in wave down in Argentina. But I'll leave it to say no more than that and turn it over to you, Scott, and let you give the intro and go take it away.
All righty. If you go ahead and advance the slide. I think I see it here. Hold on. I have just somehow lost what's going on.
Check your view up in the upper right.
I am. It's got just me and there. Okay, come on. There we go. Okay.
There we go.
Sorry, guys. Anyway, when I was thinking about decisions and how they have to be made for planning cross-country flights, I looked through my logbook and I thought I was only good for bad examples. And what we learn first, we should learn best. We learn best. And I flew with Jim 9 years ago on this flight and was so impressed with his decision making and how fast he made them. And I got to thinking that he should tell you about this because he's the expert. And not only that, but I was most impressed with Jackie. She makes Jim's flights look easy. So here's some quotes from some of the guys around the field that I came up with these conclusions. One, it's seconds. AJ was notorious for great contest flying, and he said he was making decisions almost all the time. Mike, we're after Porch Chat, before it was a Porch Chat, we're sitting around thinking, well, if you're at 1,000 feet, regardless where you are, you're in the pattern and at 200 on final. And Cindy taught me that my landing had better been planned for before I even take off. So epic decisions are made in seconds. Next slide. So it's out of focus for a reason because they are so focused. I was so amazed with how they handled things. I felt safe and I was surprised how conservative they were when they flew in the mountains. We said 1,000 feet, you're on pattern. Jim's 2,000 feet above the peaks. Don't let the online traces fool you. He is a conservative and safe pilot. Next. So what did I notice? A synergy between these two. No one talked if they didn't have to talk. No distractions. Pilots focused on everything. Airplane was ready to go. Jackie just had us open and get in. If you can find crew people like this, and if you can learn from pilots like this, these are the best. And it's your airplane, Jim and Jackie.
Thank you, Scott. So kind of an outline here, talk about aeronautical decision-making, preparation for cross-country, the kind of focus for folks that might be starting out, planning a daily mission. And Scott mentioned this 1,000-kilometer triangle from Inyukurn that we flew in 2012 as an example. Now, this is not the complete mind meld of everything there is to know about cross-country soaring. So basically what I'm trying to do here is offer some nuggets. And there are many, many great references out there. And hopefully everybody will be inspired to study and fly and have fun. So decision-making, Colonel John Boyd came up with the ODA model. He's the father of lightweight fighter. I got to fly F-16s because of him. But basically, he says, in any situation, you have to observe what's going on. And from your observations, you figure out the situation and you decide what to do next, and then you do it. And then you observe what happens and you end up in this big loop. Now, he was talking about combat. You're observing what the other guy's doing. You're orienting yourself in relationship to him. You're deciding the next course of action and acting. And he basically said that during war, the side that can do this loop faster than the other side has a big advantage. Because if you can stay ahead of the other guy, of course, you put him on defense instead of offense, you're more likely to win. Now, the FAA has digested this down into their 3P model, they call it: perceive, process, and perform. They've kind of put orient and decide into one little box. When you're soaring, you must be able to run this loop quickly to be safe. And if you find yourself getting behind the sailplane, that's a good sign that you're butting off more than you should chew, and maybe you should land and get some more instruction. Okay? But all the time when you're flying, you're out there observing. Some examples of using a model. It's amazing the amount of information you can perceive. And again, the faster you can process this information, of course, the better you're going to be. You always need to keep track of what time it is, how much time until the end of lift, how much time until sunset, where you are, how high you are. In terms of MSL and AGL, how fast am I going? What's my airspeed? What do the clouds look like close, a few miles out, far away? Other signs of lift, birds, gliders, dust devils. What's the lift rate? I remember many years ago, Ray Gimme talked about flying across country with somebody in a 2-seat glider, and he said he was amazed at how much the guy didn't observe. And he tried to make the point that the more you can observe, especially clouds out in the distance and so on, the better your soaring is going to be. And then you're kind of processing what you observed. The second question may be, how fast should I be? Is lift good enough? When do I leave? Is there enough remaining to finish a task and sunlight available? What's my alternate landing site? How much margin do I have? And then performing. Of course, want to aviate, navigate, and communicate. Now, if you're going to go across country, you have to have a prepared sailplane. Essentials, of course, are airworthy sailplane, working total energy, radio, preferably one that can monitor the standby frequency. All the modern radios, like the modern trig radios, monitor the standby frequency, which I think is a huge safety improvement, because you can now be listening or talking to Joshua approach, getting flight following while you're listening to your crew at the same time. So, communication is greatly improved that way. And then a land out kit. I'm not going to list everything you should have in your land out kit. It's going to be in part your choice, but you really need to be able to hydrate. You need to be able to communicate. You need to have some rudimentary first aid stuff with you, and personal protection, sunscreen and hat and those kinds of things. Some things should be on your parachute. For instance, if you do have a inReach or a spot with you, highly recommend it's on the parachute. If you bail out and it goes with the sailplane, of course, you won't be able to communicate with it. But you need to make sure that it's really secure. If it's Velcroed on, it's probably going to disappear during opening shock. And, there was an accident in Nevada this year where a guy in a paraglider somewhere out by Eureka, he apparently had the paraglider collapse, and he had an inReach, and there was one spot or message that came. He was like at 13,000 feet, and that was the last message. It was on a 10-minute interval, and basically he crashed before the end of that interval. That's how fast he came down when his chute failed. And of course, he hit so hard that the inReach was destroyed. So, he didn't travel that far in the 10 minutes, but he had a parachute or a rig that was gray and blue, which was not easily seen from the sky. I guess he landed in a bush, and it took like 6 weeks to find him. So communications is critical. And what's other things you can find all kinds of literature on suggested items to have in your land out kit. Subplane preparation. I like to put in a little advertisement here for a Mode S transponder. It's kind of revolutionized anti-collision ability because it's putting out your GPS location. Anybody that's got ADS-B in is going to receive you. So that means all the airliners out there, all the business jets out there, basically anybody that has powered plane that's flying above 10,000 feet, or any type of alphabet airspace has got them. So they're going to be able to see you. And it also provides free real-time flight tracking. FlightAware and Flight Radar 24 are typical apps. And, whereas most of your InReach or spot subscriptions are going to give you a 10-minute interval, these websites that are receiving the ADS-B out, anytime there's a ping, they're seeing your location. So, if you're up in some canyon in the Owens Valley, they might not see you, but the coverage actually is pretty good. And it's just another tool that you have as a pilot. When we kind of did a walkthrough on this, I had a couple of questions about flying in the Antelope Valley. Their traffic that's coming into Burbank and Van Nuys, basically they're coming from Hector or Daggett. The guys coming from Hector, they're you expect 14,000 feet from approach control if you're flying heavy iron, and about 13,000 feet over Palmdale. But you can be as low as 7,500 or 7,000 coming through there. So for a glider pilot, a direct line between Palmdale VOR, which is at the airport, and Hector is a line to be careful, especially if you're around 13 to 14,000 feet heads out. And then the ILS at Palmdale is a straight in, of course, to runway 25. And I've tried to depict here, this is typically the radar pattern. So if you're flying a T-38 or an F-16 doing a practice ILS at Palmdale, typically they put you at 5,000 feet in this box pattern as they fly you around. Okay, pilot preparation. Beyond the basics, i.e. airmanship, takeoff and landing, the most important skill for a successful cross country is finding a working lift. I got a little diagram here. I've spent a lot of time in the back seat instructing, and, students wonder why they have a hard time staying up, or they always have short flights. And typically what happens is they get close to a thermal, it picks their wing up, they don't realize it, it changes their heading. So they go off wandering this way, and then this thermal picks up their right wing and turns them this way. And it's kind of like if you had a contour, a three-dimensional contour map, and you're rolling a marble down it, it's going to go down the valleys, kind of where the sink is. So you really need to learn to feel the sailplane. And if a wing suddenly goes up, you need to understand that, well, I should be a negative feedback mechanism and turn towards that wing. In this case here, you just turn left, you might go into the thermal. So anyway, for people that are new to the sport, I highly recommend any chance you get sore, try to stay up, especially on weekdays. It really gives you an extra sense. And I've even recommended clubs that you have people get their 5-hour duration before they go cross country, just to prove that they've kind of mastered thermaling. Simulation, Condor is an interesting program. It can be a great tool for learning. Unfortunately, you can't feel the nuances in the air, feeding back through the stick. But in terms of just the process of going cross country, using a simulator is a wonderful thing. Now, planning a daily mission. Of course, weather is critical to our soaring. These commercial websites like Scutters are wonderful things. They save you a lot of time when it comes time to planning a task. Picking a task, you should have several possibilities ahead of time so that the day of you don't have to do a lot of planning. Just pick the task and load it in your computer or whatever. Prep the sailplane yourself, your crew. And if you're going to go for a Badger record, you have to have an official observer. So do that.
So I've been married to Jim for 40 years and crewing for him for 40 years. And I'm not sure I recommend it for everybody. It's not for the faint of heart, but it certainly does make for some interesting post-flight stories. If you are going to go for a badge or a record, and the state records are a really good place to start if you're going to start in, shooting for some records, you're going to need a GPS flight recorder with the appropriate approval. And not all of them, especially the older ones, are not grandfathered necessarily anymore. You'll have to keep up to date on the list on that. You'll need your own official observer, and it has to be a senior level observer if it's the national or world record category. So those observers have proven that they know the rules just a little bit better, and they've got a lot more experience. And then if you are going to go for the US or world record, then you have to have a sporting license. Typically what you do is you join the SSA, which I highly recommend. It's a strong organization to support soaring. But then you must also join the NAA, and it's $65.
It's 50 for the lowest level.
Okay, $50, no, for the sporting license.
It's included in a silver membership, which
Okay.
is $50.
So joining the NAA at their lowest level, the silver level is what Jim calls it, is $50. That used to be part of your SSA membership, oh my gosh, 10 years ago, maybe 20. It is definitely not part of it now. They don't seem to remind you to renew. It's good for 1 year, and you're pretty much going to have to put it on your own calendar and renew. One of the things that is helpful is the badge and record worksheet. It comes from the SSA, and this is a form that they have devised themselves. You basically fill in the blanks, and it'll remind you to do quite a lot of things that might slip your mind, when you're working to get the glider launched. You need to know the time of it. You need to know what the pressure altitude is locally, but there's places to fill in the blank that'll cue you on each of those. So most of the things that we do with soaring is we have checklists, and the checklists get longer and longer because there's a story behind every single item on the checklist. Like, oh, remember the time when we forgot to, and then that item goes on the checklist. So when you see the daily checklist for soaring and it's that long, that's the slide that's coming up. It's only to help you not make quite as many mistakes as Jim and I have made in 40 years. So it's a cheat sheet. The other things that you want to make sure of is you want a suitable vehicle. That means it needs gasoline. It needs a credit card for gasoline in case they have to go on a long retrieve. And some cash would be nice to lunch or a 6-pack of beer before they come to get you. Maybe they start drinking the beer while they're on the road, but that's up to them. The other thing I would remind you, if you're leaving them a credit card to get gas, is it's typically got a zip code attached to it. You might want to put a little sticky note on the back of that credit card, so the crew who has no idea who you are or where you live knows has on there what zip code you have to have. The trailer should be either hooked up or ready to hook up, which means it's got everything inside that it should, not somewhere else on the airfield. And it would be really nice to have good tires on that trailer. And it would be super if the wheel bearings, if they're the kinds that have to be repacked, have been looked at in the past 10 years or so. That'd be really great, so you don't lose a tire as you're going out. A radio is great. Not everybody knows how to operate handheld radios. And I know that I was sort of concerned about talking in a radio when I first. So a little bit of a practice. If if they don't know how to change the frequency, you better get that right frequency in there, and you better have a lock button and lock it so that they don't change the frequency, because it's real easy to change on a handheld and they don't notice it and they don't know how to get back. Cell phones are good, and that's both in the plane and in the crew car. And have a plan for when nothing else goes right.
Okay, speaking of checklists, here's an example of our checklist for going to the airport. And actually for the days prior. And I also have a couple cases like this that I put stuff in, namely things like the inReach and chargers, cannulas, batteries for my heated socks, the wiring for my heated socks, headlamp, key to the hangar, some spare AA and AAA batteries for like the EDS, oximeter, and so on. But just having a system like this where you keep all the chargers and all the items in one little spot, easy to move, really helps and reduces the chance of leaving something behind. I also, from my Air Force experience, I always fly with a knee board and take notes. And it's really helpful, especially after flight, kind of reconstructing what went on. And, you know, for instance, an example here, this is the flight that Scott and I flew. Took off at 10:35. I've got my rough air red lines here. You know, you should have a pretty good idea what they are, but, you know, having a memory jogger is good. You know, frequencies for the various agencies you might fly by as you're going up the Owens Valley, for instance. And then at each turn point, I write down the altitude. My decimals here look like ones, but that's like 13,000 feet the first turn point, at 115, 15,000 feet at 1536 the second turn point. And we landed at 8:04, sunset was 8:03, but the glider had nav lights on it. We had the nav lights on, so we were legal. So this is the route of the flight that Scott and I flew. And basically, I'd flown a very similar triangle twice before in '96, once in my SH-25 and then once in a discus to claim the Hilton Cup. And on this particular flight, the goal was to win the Baron Hilton Challenge in the OLC. And, you know, some things that are part of the planning here. Number one, Inyakern is an excellent place to start. You know, the sun in the morning is shining on the Sierra, and you tend to get the early lift along the ridge. And of course, that helps you get an early start. If you're going to make a long flight, one key is having an early start. When you get up towards the switchbacks, which are right here where the cursor is, kind of give yourself a choice with a route like this. On previous times, I've crossed over and actually gone up the whites. I'd add some distance, but for instance, when I did it in my discus, there was a great big storm right here. It already OD'd, so it allowed me to get around the storm. And then once I got to the first turn, it was good sailing the discus. On this particular day, the clouds started about Sakatar right here. There were decent clouds along here, except the bases were kind of low, so I didn't have as much working room as I'd like. It turned very scattered in this area right here. And then once we got to the turn, the clouds are really nice. Had a good cloud streak going to the turn point, good cloud streak coming back. And normally I would want to go to Boundary Peak right here. But this particular day, there was a big rainstorm over White Mountain area. So you had to go around Circle L, and there's a big gap here and clouds along the Inyos. So that's where we transitioned back to Inyos. And normally from 15, 16,000 feet, you could do a final glide to Inyakern. And again, there was a shower right here. So I went across and around the shower to get back. You like to make the triangle as flat as possible. The FAA has some rules. The shortest leg has to be at least 25% of the total distance. And the longest leg, 45%. The longest leg can't be more than 45%. Now that's for over 750 kilometers. If it's less than 750, then they have to what they call a 28% rule. Basically, the shortest leg can't be less than 26%, 28%. Okay, so what I'm going to try to do here is do a CU playback of the flight and kind of talk about the decisions as we went along here. There we go. Okay, so can you see the CU image?
Yep.
Yep.
Okay, so as a motor glider, so we made some turns over the airport. My start point is right about here. Climbed up a little bit there. Yeah, it's real early in the day, so I'm taking weak lift. Got a little bit of tailwind, which is a good thing. We're up on top of the ridge. Getting up towards Sakatah, we're getting where the clouds are. Really the first good climb of the day. But the cloud base is not as high as, you'd really like. Because the cloud base is low, I'm taking more turns than I'd like to take. Trying to find some good ones. We're starting to get where the clouds end. So I'm just flying conservative. It's still early in the day. This is Cowdy Flats near Bishop. As we're coming up on Tom's Place here, Lake Crowley's right here. Mammoth Ski area is over here. Again, the clouds are kind of thin here, so we're being conservative. Trying to get back to the clouds. They're on this high ground here. Okay, first turn point, 13,000 feet. Try to. Then part of my flight planning here, the high ground north of Lee Vining, north of Mono Lake is normally very good. And then you got Mount Grant and you got Hawthorne over here. Then you end up with an area which is blue on this day. And of course, that's kind of a sinkhole for most of the time. And we ended up getting to our low point out there. Standard thing, slowing up in the lift, speeding up in the sink. Okay, now we're going out into the blue, so we're being conservative. Down to 11,000 feet or so. 10,000, 10,200. Okay, a good climb. Okay, back to the clouds. Then we got some good streeting. So it's a matter of just executing here. Still got a tailwind. So Austin got a tailwind trying to stay high coming into the turn. Making a turn and chasing the clouds back out. Now, unfortunately here, we got a little bit of headwind, but given the geometry, it's kind of no choice. So 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And now we can tell that it's overdeveloped over the White Mountain area. So I'm coming south, well east of where I'd like to be. Stop it for just a second and try to turn it so kind of going down track here. This is kind of Colville here. North end of the Whites is over here. There's US 6. So west of Circle L, down around 13,000 feet. And of course, from that location, the Whites are kind of tall. So we're headed towards Westgard Pass. We got enough to make it through the pass. Then we get back to the clouds and a good climb. And just chasing the clouds south. We're at 15,500 or so, which would normally be good enough for a final glide. We got this rain shower here that we need to stay around and get around. Because this is not a speed task, I'm being extremely conservative right here. I got plenty of time to get to Inyakern. Just trying to eke out a little extra altitude so I can go past Inyakern and get a few more OLC points. Of course, this is a fun time. You know, you've got the task made. And I went past to get a few extra points, came back and landed at Inyakern. Okay. So as an example of the OLC posting came back. So you've got the graphic from the OLC now, Chris? Okay.
Yeah.
We got credited for 1,104 kilometers. The triangle is 1,052 kilometers. And you can see here, if you look at the map, it looks like there's some really huge deviations. But those deviations really pay off because that's where the good lift is. And it really enables you to go fast. So even though it might look on a map like it's a big deviation, in total, it's really worth doing it. In this case, it cost us like 53 kilometers to make these deviations compared to the straight lines. This is like really we only had one low point here. This one here is coming back here, but we still had enough to make our final glide to Inyakern. So anyway, as Scott mentioned earlier, I tend to be conservative, and typically it kind of pays off in the long run. And the final result was we were able to steal the world championship in the Barron Hilton Challenge in 2012 as a result of this flight. Like all aviation, a big flight in a sailplane is really the sum of many little segments, glides and turns. Start small and work up. My first record climb was done in 1982, flying a 126 in Region 6. And I flew a 100-kilometer triangle at 22 miles an hour. It is a record because nobody else had ever done it in Region 6. That's how I got started. The OLC, I think, is a fantastic tool for new people because you can look at the traces of people that have flown in locations before, and you can look at where they went and really get a feel for what the area is like. So, read everything you can, study the OLC, and, ask questions of anybody you come across that might be able to help you. And be safe. If you make the best flight ever, relatively few people are going to care. So, it's not worth risking your body to try to go a little bit faster. There may be more people in the grandstands at the first turn at the Indy 500 than will ever know about your soaring flight. So, keep it in perspective. Some final reminders, as pilots, we're only as good as our last flight. Proficiency does decay over time. Now, if you have a lot more experience, it's easier to get proficiency back. But, we're kind of in the winter phase here. A lot of people aren't soaring right now. But spring is coming. It's not far away. Do some local proficiency soaring before you head out and have a really good season. Hopefully, we'll have some great weather this year. And this COVID thing will be behind us. And people can have a lot of fun and expand their horizons. So with that, I'd entertain any questions.
Yeah, thanks. That was just really great, to the point, good presentation. Very much appreciate it, Jim. If folks have questions, let's go ahead and you can unmute yourself and ask any questions you have. We've got a couple of minutes for sure. It's 7, 8, 9 minutes to have questions.
Yeah. I'm curious what the % of circling time was on that flight.
Wow, it would say in CU, it was probably on the order of, I'm just guessing, maybe 15%. On these long flights, typically the circling percentage is pretty low. The longest thermal flight I've done is 1,500 kilometers on the 4th of July. I forget what year, from Tehachapi, but that was in the SH-25, and we thermaled 5 times in 1,500 kilometers. And a couple of those were just because I wanted to get back up towards cloud base, because you're more efficient as you're a little higher.
Right. Okay, thanks.
In your earlier slide, you talked about equipment, and you said mode S transponder, and you had AVSC or AVSC out in parentheses. Are you equating those two, or they're not the same?
I'm not an expert on transponders, but I thought you had to have a mode S transponder to get your ADS-B signal out. I've got a Trig 22. I highly recommend the Trig 22. I've run it on its own battery. I think I had a 7 amp hour battery, and it would run over 12 hours. The Trig 22. Now that was before the GPS was added. But they're miserly on the power, and they seem to work extremely well.
Hey, Jim.
Yes.
Yeah, thanks for doing this, first of all. My question is, you went over some pretty desolate area out there. I've never driven that area, as far as that, but in general, my thoughts was it's pretty desolate. Does that concern you as far as if something were to happen, retrieve, or do you have land outs that you've previously checked out and are close enough to roads, stuff like that, that you've got pretty much all the time? If something should happen, you start losing altitude?
Yeah, on that flight, I doubt very much I was ever outside of a good landing site. Going up the Owens Valley, of course, you got Inyakern, you got the airports at Lone Pine, Independence, Bishop, Mammoth, Lee Vining. And then on the second leg, you got an airport at Bridgeport. You've got Sweetwater. You've got Hilton's. You've got Hawthorne. And all those, if you're above 11,000 feet or so, you can get to from that along that segment, actually even lower than that. And then after Hawthorne, of course, you got Mina at the dry lake at town north of Mina. You got Gabbs, there's a couple dry lakes out there. You got Austin Airport. And coming back south again, you got a couple dry lakes. I didn't get too close to Tonopah, but you got Circle L, you got the fields down at Circle L. And then of course, when you have out back across the White Mountains, then you've got the airports again. So, I've flown around the area and driven around the area enough. I've got a whole list of outlanding sites. Carl Harold, he had a book that had all the outlanding sites that he'd surveyed in Nevada. I'm not sure what happened to that, but if you get a copy of that, that's a fantastic tool. Although, that's probably at least 10 years old.
Sagebrush is
So the sagebrush is probably grown up. And if you end up with a wet year, not all the dry lakes are really dry. But no, you can very safely fly in that area with a little bit of research on where the suitable landing sites are without having to land on roads.
That certainly brings up one of the upcoming, a topic that was discussed and given by Cindy Bickner about making safe landouts, but also, one of the things we'll be doing in the very coming end of February or early March is the AVSC group and any other folks who want to join is to do a sneaker check, and drive up the valley from Antelope Valley up to Tehachapi and probably, a little bit beyond that and check out all the possible landing sites and do that on the ground check.
And
I
just,
have a copy.
just a thought, Olancha, I'm not sure what the condition of Olancha is. Driving by Owens Lake, they've got all these new roads out on the lake where they're putting in the salt grass or whatever. I wouldn't be surprised if there's some really nice spots on the south end of Owens Lake now that could be researched.
Yeah, I wonder about the access to get a car out there, but yeah, that's something to look into.
I don't know. If you really got in trouble, especially if you had like an 18-meter or a 20-meter ship that probably shouldn't land at Olancha. That is a possibility.
Yeah.
I was going to say that I have Carl Harold's Land Out DVD or CD and all the information, but it is old, and I'd want to check with Carl's next of kin. They were charging $30 for the copies. I don't want to release it unless I've got permission to do so, but it might be a good start, and maybe for sneakers on the ground, while you're in the vicinity, it'd be nice to know how many of these are still landable.
Yeah, ditto that. We have a list that was provided to me by one of our pilots who received the list from a gentleman up in Tehachapi. That list needs updating. And speaking of updating, I mean, from what I've been hearing, even if it's 6 or 8 weeks old, some things do change that fast.
I'd also like to point out that we were above 14,000 for a period of time, and that we were on oxygen in the aircraft. It's just so you know.
Right.
I'm ex-Air Force. The Air Force requires oxygen above 10,000 feet, so I always use it 10,000 feet. Sometimes I'll actually, we're using EDS. I'll put it on D5 sometimes, especially if you're going to fly late. But with EDS, I mean, it's miserly, and oxygen is pretty cheap compared to, making a bad decision. So, have a system that has enough quantity to fly all day and use it as required.
Yeah. Are there any other questions, or anybody jump at the bit to pick Jim's brain about any particular item that's there's some little bit of that. Go ahead.
For both Jim and Jackie, how do how do you become experts in your field? And how do we become that fast? As you know, how can we be that way, that fast, real fast?
Well, yeah, of course, studying the literature, I went to the Air Force Academy, and I was actually inspired to try soaring by a National Geographic article I saw when I was probably in junior high school. And it was actually talking about street ridge soaring in the Appalachians. And that kind of inspired me. I got involved with the cadet soaring program, but they didn't really do any cross country. So I had to self-teach myself cross country. I didn't have any mentors. And over the years, a lot of study. And of course, it's kind of a passion for me. And it's just one of those things that big passion.
I would imagine that, and I've just noticed this from my just very, newbie at this whole thing, but there's some people who just know how to find those thermals and sniff them out.
Jim, I'm sure
As a cadet, I always got in trouble for staying up.
Mhm.
We were doing basic instruction all the time, and my favorite day was the day when I could stay up, nobody else could. But I kept getting in trouble. But it was just in my blood.
on this flight, Jim, was the chase crew able to stay within 50 or 75 miles of you? Or
No, this was we're optimistic. So Jackie never left Inyakern.
no?
Oh,
Well, that makes it a lot easier on the crew.
She rarely does. She really does. I think I added up I got 126 flights over 1,000 now, and probably 100 of those I got back to the airport. So on the days like some of these long wave flights, at the end of the day, I've planned on landing down by Palm Springs or something like that. So later in the day when we know that it's a probability, she'll head out ahead of me because typically the ground speed's higher in a sailplane. But when you're first learning to go cross country, not unreasonable to start somewhere in the Antelope Valley, Tehachapi, Inyakern, Crystal, or wherever, and plan on going up the Owens Valley and landing someplace like Bishop. And on days like that, you should once you start going, have the crew come along. If you've got a inReach or a spot where the crew can, with a smartphone, go to the website and see what your location is, it really helps the crew keep track of where you are, and it reduces the radio chatter where you don't have to keep explaining to the crew where you are, especially if you have a crew that doesn't know where a lancha is, sort of thing.
How dependent on GPS were you, Jim, on that flight? Could have you done the flight without GPS?
Oh yes. I started soaring before GPS, and pilotage was one of my things, and actually kind of gave me an advantage in contests. So GPS is kind of a negative in terms of that. But now the Owens Valley and Nevada, I've got that learned. So navigating, GPS doesn't do anything for me in terms of navigating. It's really helpful in figuring out glide angles to stuff. You can do it mentally, but as I talked about doing your decision loop, any little aid you've got that can help you with mental math or whatever is, of course, going to help you be a little bit better. But no, the navigating, I can't remember the last time I looked at a compass in a sailplane.
Well, I just want to repeat a couple of comments that have been made in case folks haven't looked at the chat window, that when Scott was asking about how do you get there to be as good as Jim. Cindy's comment, keep making incremental improvements by flying often, being methodical in record keeping a journal, and adding checklists to improve each experience. And then about the land outs, Kathy Fosha said Jim Stanforth updates the landing locations on the Tehachapi.io website, the group's website, and I guess that gets updated quite often, so that's a big help. Yeah, everybody appreciates the work that Jim puts in on that, I'm sure.
And to add on what Cindy said, she's exactly correct. And I rarely make a flight where I don't have some sort of goal. You know, I was pretty fortunate when I first started out. There were a lot of low records. You know, they didn't have standard class records until about the time I started flying my LS4. So there was some pretty easy national records to get early on, which was a big motivation. And you know, I've just built on that. But yeah, if you declare a task, and Jim Staniforth is really good with the Tehachapi crowd of picking, you know, he's got his 500K triangles and 750 triangles and so on. You know, set a task and try to do that task. And it really helps improve the discipline and, you know, the skills you need in order to do it.
Yeah, exactly. Another comment from Walt says, short triangles are lap races, quote unquote, are good practice. We did this in the 1980s to early 1990s. Tehachapi Valley, lots of fun. Short triangles are lap races. And there's actually a new program being offered by a Canadian outfit that I guess they're kind of putting a little package together and offering it to clubs. It's called the Proving Ground. And they will put together triangles for your club. And then there's awards as you go through and do each triangle. Then you get some kind of award and work your way up. So yeah, that sounds like the way to, certainly one of the early steps, and that's what I'll be working on.
Hey, Jim.
Yes.
So when you're underway, what do you use to determine the floor of now I have to go to my alternate? You know, do you have an L over D that's required to make the alternate, that if you hit that, you say, well, I can't go on, or you use McCready, or what do you use to define that?
But currently I'm flying with the LX 9000, and it'll display the glide angle you've achieved over the last 20 seconds, and it'll show the glide angle to a location. So I'm typically, I've got my alternate dialed up in the LX, and I'm looking for, pretty conservative glide angle, on the order of 30-1 and something like the Nixus as a minimum. But, that's always caveated with what I observe around. If there's still good clouds, there's a high probability of finding a thermal. If it's starting to rain, that sort of thing, you need to add a little bit extra margin. So, there's all kinds of things that go into the decision matrix.
Thanks.
Jim, what is your greatest aviation achievement?
My greatest aviation achievement? Wow. I don't know, some of the things I did in the Air Force were big achievements. Of course, the Perlan flights, that's a team deal. I was fortunate enough to have the expertise to be in a position to really help there. But, given that the Perlan team was a bunch of volunteers, of course, we've got pretty high expertise, but to design and build that airplane and actually prove that the wave goes as high as it does, I guess that's got to be the apex of my soaring.
Hey, Jim, this is Walt here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. What are your thoughts about electric sustainers and FES? Matthew Scudder recently won one of the early E-Glide championships in Germany. And I saw a talk on it last February at the SSA convention over in Europe, another E-Glide contest. And they seem like a lot of fun. Of course, we don't have many of those gliders yet. They're in the future still.
Yeah, I've got a Chevy Volt, and it's got battery. I can get 60 miles out of the battery, and which since COVID, I haven't taken any long trips to speak of. So I've only burned, I don't know, 5 or 6 gallons of gas in it since last March. Electric is a wonderful thing. Probably the biggest upside in a sailplane is if you have voltage there's an extremely high probability that the motor is going to run. Unlike, you know, your piston engine, there's so many parts that can fail. So because electrics are quieter, because they got many fewer moving parts, they're not going to vibrate as bad as piston engine and so on. I think it's all a matter of being able to come up with, you know, solid state batteries or something, so you have enough energy density to have enough energy to make it worthwhile. In the meantime, I think it would be a fantastic thing if somebody could come up with about a 25 horsepower generator. So you could basically have a hybrid glider. So, you know, you basically have the same engine that Antares has got with enough battery to say climb 3,000 feet, plus you would have this generator. And you run the generator plus the battery for your initial climb, put the prop away, and keep running the generator until the battery's full. And then you've got, you know, the electric. It's almost as good as having a twin engine airplane if you got the generator plus the battery. I think it'll, especially in these days when you know, there's fewer and fewer people out there crewing, it could really help. And maybe even, you know, electric training gliders would be quiet enough. You could move back into places like the old Fremont glider port. You know, I think one reason that the soaring community is withering is the lack of training facilities close to metropolitan areas. You know, it used to be most of the people that soared at Minden started someplace in the Bay Area, like Fremont, where my brother learned to fly. So yes, electrics are the future, Walt.
Yeah.
I agree. I agree. I think it would be a great fun doing little tasks with the managing the battery left and completing a task. Great fun.
Well, if there are no more questions, I think we're going to call it right here. And we really want to thank Jim and Jackie Payne for joining us on our cross-country porch chats here. And we'll, shall we just sort of check in with you in the midsummer and give you an update on how some of our folks are progressing? Would you like to hear about that, Jim?
Well, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
Great.
I encourage everybody to put their flights on the OLC. You know, summer days, I peruse the OLC logs just to see who's flying where and what kind of flights they're making. So even if you're only making, you know, 50-kilometer flights, post it, because that can help somebody else and encourage somebody else to go fly.
Absolutely. Well, I'm starting the punch list of the items that we need to get our 134, because that's the best single seat ship we have for flying around the AVSC. So we're working on a punch list of all the things that we'll need to get ready for summer soaring. So again, thanks to both Jim and Jackie and to Scott, because Jim and Jackie wouldn't actually be talking to us if Scott hadn't had a brainstorm and decided to call his friend Jim and Jackie. So this has been, again, fantastic. And let you know that we're working, well, next week is Walt back to his weather briefs for the weekend, and then talk more in depth about the weather tools. And then coming the middle of February, Scott's going to continue on the cross-country prep and the good, bad, and ugly. And so he's going to give more insight as to his knowledge about preparation and what not to do and how to have good decision-making skills. And then back to Walt. And then in March, just to let you know what's up and coming from March, I've gotten a thumbs up from Scott Manley to talk to us about how to use Condor for practice and skills. And just that'll be fun to just learn from Scott about how to use Condor for those of you who are having fun with that, and people like me who are still trying to get that hooked up to my computer. So again, thanks everybody and for joining us, and have a good week, and we'll see you next Wednesday. Take care.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you,
Take
everybody.
care.
Thank you, Jim, Jackie, everybody, Chris, especially.
Thank you, Jim, Jackie. Thanks again.
Take care, everybody.
Our pleasure.
Bye.
Thank you.